In this tutorial, we're going to cover geometry nodes and how to use geometry nodes to save you time while making sure that geometry nodes does not impact a specific area. For example, if you want to plant a tree and you don't want any of the rocks or grass to be around the tree because you just want the area clean, I'm going to show you how to do that. Additionally, you can see this is done with geometry nodes. You can see the space moving here across the screen like that, and this is all done with geometry nodes. And just to show you what I mean of how practical it is, if we look at our scene over here, I'm just going to go to the beginning and I'm going to press play. If we watch this closely, you can see that the area automatically starts to clear wherever this tree is, to make sure that the tree trunk is never overlapping with grass or stone. Alright, so that's kind of what we're going to cover today. And obviously if I go into render view mode, it looks more like this. I'm currently using cycles. We can switch back to Eevee. I mean, it's all up to you. I'm going to cover everything that we've covered so far. All right. So in the last tutorial, I showed you how to add all these materials. And just for a brief recap, if you're not going to watch the last tutorial, let me show you where I got what. So, number one, this is the ground I downloaded. It's at polyhaven.com forestground_1, and this would be the underlying ground that you see over here. And we did make some changes to it that I'll show you in a second, but we made it look like this. And how did we do that? Well, if you want it to look the exact same, I'm just going to switch to my shader editor and I'm going to click on my land or ground. Yep, I called it ground. Perfect. And I'm just going to deselect so I can only look at the ground nicely. So in terms of the shader, I've added 3 images that we downloaded there, which is the diff that I connected to an RGB curve, and I just reduced the contrast and increased the green by a little bit, and that's about it. And I connected to a multiply, which is just an RGB, Control A, RGB, mix RGB, which is just a mix RGB, and then you just switch to multiply. That's how you get that in case you need to Blender. And I reduced the factor to 0.35, and this obviously goes into color 1, and then color 2 we connect the NOR, which you'll see in the other one, and then we connect this to the color base color, and you can kind of play around with it until you get a similar result. The biggest change is using the NOR, connecting the color to a normal map, and obviously if you press Shift A, you can just go over here and type in normal and choose normal map and change it to Blender object space, and I made it 2.5 and I connected it to the normal. And finally I just connected the rough into the rough, and then for this step you don't really have to worry about. It's just making sure that they're all in the exact same coordinates, but they should be if you didn't mess with them. And I just increased changes to 1.5. And the way to do this, if you've got Node Wrangler enabled, let's go to Edit, Preferences. Let's go over all the plugins that you need. Well, one thing you do need is search for sapling tree. You can make sure this is not ticked and then search and you'll find it here, and then you just tick it. The other stuff you need is Node Wrangler, which is a vital thing working in Blender. Outside of that, I did add extra objects and I just turned them both on. And once you've got that all enabled, you are ready to rock and roll. And you click on this and you just press Control T, and it pops up all of this information here. And then I just connected the same one to all of them. Alright, so that is the settings for the ground. And now we're going to move on to the grass. And I believe I showed you this. I used a low poly grass I got from CG Trader. It's free. Adam127 made it, I guess. And yeah, you can just download this. If you've got a potato PC, it will still work. It's low poly, which is great. And once you've downloaded this, let's go back into our Blender scene. We're going to select our grass. Free grass. I think if you import it without renaming it, will be called free grass. And all I did is probably did a few things I could have done better here, but all I did in a very short, nasty way is I connected the free grass PNG to the base color, and then I also used the free grass PNG for the alpha, and I just connected the alpha to it, and then I just used a normal map to create it, and I clicked on tangent to give this effect, and that's how I got the grass looking like that. Outside of that, we also got these rocks. If we look at these rocks, where did we download these rocks? Let's quickly find out where we got those textures. I believe it was on, yeah, Polyhaven. And all you need to do is click on textures and then type in rock, and I believe it's rock 5, which is this, no, rock 8. Yeah, this one, yeah, rock 5. So this is the URL you can go to if you want to match the same rock. And once you've got that rock enabled, it's pretty much the same setup as we did for the ground. And then we just, only thing we changed from flat, we changed this to box and put on 0.2 for all of them, so that it didn't look stretched out and look more natural, which was quite important. And then over here, object space 3.5. And yeah, hopefully you've seen enough here, and we can move on. Pretty much copying and pasting the node structure of the ground. And then we've got this tree. How did we get this tree? We enabled a plugin called Edit Preferences. Type in tree, add curve sapling tree. So once we've done that, I'm going to press numpad 1, press Shift A, and in your curve section, you'll note, well, hold on, curves, sapling tree at the bottom here. And then you can decide what you want. Pull this down. And I'm going to geometry, and you can load a preset. So I think I might have used a Japanese maple. And then I went to, where's leaves? Leaves, I made sure it was enabled. And then I went to branch splitting, and I can increase this, and I decreased this in this example. And you can kind of play around with this and find out what you like. You can also go to the leaves and make them thicker and stuff, but I think you get the idea. Control Z. Right, so then how did I add, where did I get the textures for this tree, I guess? I'm just quickly going over this because it's not the purpose of the tutorial, but in case you do want to follow, you need to know where to download this stuff. I found this on CG Trader, another free one. Let's go over here. And this was from ECACC. You can download it, and then you can just basically copy this node structure. My node structure might not be perfect or correct in any way, so feel free not to use it, but I connected the ambient occlusion, which was a mistake, into the specular, but whatever. Then I connected the metallic with the metallic. I connected the roughness with the roughness. I connected the base color with an RGB curve, messing with the reds, greens, and blues, and the contrast into the base color to have that effect. And then finally, I connected the normal into the normal. And that's pretty much it. And then finally, the tree also has, if you expand this open, yeah, the leaves. The tree also has leaves. Now, if we look at the leaves here, I just basically connected two things here. I didn't waste too much time on it. And where did I find it? Well, let's go back to the web, and I used this. And I'm just going to go back to the pack, Red Alter Texture Pack, and I just downloaded this. And this is from GG30222. Yep, pretty cool. Once you've downloaded that, I just grabbed the red ALD1B and the red ALD1B underscore OC. And the first one I connected to a color ramp so I could mess with the colors and connected it to the base color. And the second one I basically just connected to the subsurface color and the roughness. And by no means do I recommend you follow that. I'm just messing around to get the effect that I was somewhat interested in. But the important stuff now, let's dive into geometry nodes. Alright, so currently, as you can tell, as this empty over here, if we maybe do this, as this empty moves, let's go back into material viewport, give it a second to load. You'll notice that areas disappear and to make sure that this tree is never intersecting with a rock or something, so it's nice and clean. Well, there's actually a lot that goes on here. First off, if you're adding an empty to the scene, but before you do, let's quickly talk about the geometry nodes that we added here. Now, in the previous tutorial, just in case you have been following, you may have added the rocks using particle system. Unfortunately, the particle system is broken when it comes to geometry nodes, and geometry nodes is about to go through a major update, which means everything you see here will work for Blender 2.9, and then at version 3.0 and onwards, they're completely overhauling the system. But I use Blender 2.9 in this. So the things that you want to pay attention to is, I clicked on my ground, which is just the plane, which if we press tab, I basically subdivided 100 times. Let me just show you next to this, so I can show you. So basically all you need to do is the following: Shift A, mesh, plane, and then I scroll down here, I press tab to go into edit mode, right click, subdivide, I create 100 cuts, then I press S4, S5, yeah, S4, S5, something like that should be fine. I think I scaled it afterwards based on the camera, that angle that I got. G, Y, something like that. And then once you've got this, let me just quickly hide the other ground. You can press tab to go into object mode, and if your computer can handle it, I'd recommend one more subdivision, which is overkill, but and keep it on simple, but just have it there for an even better effect. And then once you've done that, we can now go to the geometry nodes, and we'll create a geometry node system. And just like that, you have it. And then we can go back to our ground quickly, and we basically connect our group input into poison disk, into a point distribute. Shift A, you go to point and choose point distribute, and you change from random to poison disk. Poison disk basically means it's less likely to overlap. So let me just demonstrate this with not with the plane that I just showed you how to make, in case you didn't know how. Numpad 7, let's go to poison disk. Now if we mess with this poison disk, if we say these things are too close together, let's separate them further. But just keep in mind, as you separate them further, let's just have our camera ready here so we can view it in our render view mode. And I'm just going to do one more thing so I'm not distracted from what the camera doesn't see. Right, so as you increase this, and you make it too far, there'll be nothing in the scene. That's why you kind of want to reduce this, have it as low as possible to the point where they're still not touching each other. 1 meter looks like that, 0.5 meters looks like this, and then 0.3 is when it starts getting a little bit too close. And then we can play with the density. We might say, this is too much. Let's just put this on 20. Let's put this on 10. Let's put this on 5. Let's put this on 1. You can see it gets less and less and less. I'll max it out at 100 to make it overkill. Or we can put it on 50, which is still overkill for the scene. Let's try 20. Okay, 20 is not as overkill. Right, so that's what this does. And you can mess with the seeds where everything is placed by pressing this. But you'll notice no matter how you mess with the seeds, it's not going to interfere with this space here. Well, it shouldn't. But yeah, it's a little bit wonky. The old geometry system is using the old version of like Blender 2.76's color maps or something like that. So they're kind of changing that and overhauling it completely to make it more procedural. Alright, so then we connect this to an attribute fill node, and we're going to call this, we're going to create an attribute that currently doesn't exist, and we're going to call it scale. It is case sensitive, so just keep it in mind. And if we mess with this, put it on 3.1, and put it on 1, doesn't make much of a difference. So you just leave this, normally the default value is 0, but just put it on 1 so that it knows it's turned on. It's just like on or off kind of thing. Then we connect this to an attribute vector math, and we choose distance, and we leave it on attribute and change this to vector. And then we create a new attribute which we type in position, and we connect our object info here, which you just go Shift A. This would be an input object info, and we'll connect this. We'll connect an empty into it, and the empty would be this one over here. So you just have to add an empty to your scene by pressing Shift A, empty, and I just used the circle and I rotated it on the x-axis 90 degrees to make it flat. So it's just easier for me to visually see. It's still one single point when you're using these. Doesn't matter what type of empty you actually use. Alright, and then we connect this to the B, and the new name we're giving this is distance. So basically we're saying that the position of our empty, the relative position of our empty to our ground, the result will be our distance, right? And then we connect this to a color ramp, and what this does is says that the distance will never be less than 0 and never be greater than 1. And we change this to constant. Why? Well, let's take a quick look here. So currently, if I press numpad 7, and I'm going to hide the tree just to demonstrate this. So currently we have this clear space over here, which is nice. But if we change it to ease, it eases in. If we change it to linear, like it doesn't work as well. And we could try and do this to push it out. But for me, it just makes sense to use constant. And it's like basically the max. You can play around with this to see what you like. And then we're saying that the attribute coming from, that we just call distance is going to be combined with the attribute color ramp, and this is going to be the new thing that's called distance, the final thing that's called distance. And then we're going to connect this to an attribute randomize something. Hold on, let's get the full name. Attribute randomize, yeah. And we basically take the vector, and we're going to place it with an attribute for rotation. And this is just to rotate the rocks and grass, so it's not too boring. And basically I made the X and Y axis 0 and 0, and I made the only change that can happen, but this can actually just be 1. The only rotation it can rotate on the Z axis, so it's never going to go upside down or look weird. It's just rotating around one axis. And you can mess with this over here to change the random rotations of these rocks. And then we're going to connect it to another attribute randomize. Now we're going to randomize the scale, so some rocks are small and some are big. We make the min 0.1, and which is probably this over here, and the max 1, which is probably the biggest rock you see over here. And you can mess with this and see what you like. And then we connect this to an attribute math node, where we say the scale, distance scale. So basically what we're saying is we need to multiply the scale, which we've defined over here, with the distance, which we redefined over here, and this will be the new scale. And then we connect this to the point instance, and I'm using a collection. The collection that I'm using, well, the collection that I was using, or I am using, yeah, still using, is collection 2, I think. Yeah, which has got my free grass and rock. And you'll notice that one thing that I do like to do is make sure that this collection does not render out. Because if you render it out, you're going to have your single objects. Let's click on free grass. You're going to have this object here and this object here rendering out that might not match the geometry scene. It doesn't need to. You just need to disable it in the render view, but it will still pick up on the particle system. Just to quickly demonstrate this, I believe I'm in Eevee, so this will, no, let's change to Eevee because it'll be quicker. Let's quickly click render image. Unfortunately, you have to render this out in cycles. Apologies. Render image. And when you render it out in cycles, I guess I'm mistaken. Oh my goodness, I'm wasting your time here. Looks like we have no choice but to make sure that it does work. I had it working last night. I'm not too sure what's going on here. Okay, there it's working. Okay, great. So let's quickly go back to the ground. But now the thing is, when you're dealing with this empty, now that we've done this and we connect it to a join geometry, and then we just connect the input back into the joint geometry, so it's also connected to the output. So not only do you have all these instances of your grass and rock connected, you also have the ground connected, because we're doing everything inside of the ground. If we don't have this, the ground disappears, and it's just rock and grass. And that's just a little bit weird. So if we want the land back, the ground back, we need to connect this like that. Hopefully that's easy to follow and understand. I'm trying not to go too deep in this because there's been a massive overhaul with geometry nodes. But I mean, some of these basic principles should apply moving forward. Alright, so now we can move on to the next part, which is the empty. There is one unique thing about this empty that we've done. I can just re-enable this. Select the empty. I created a new collection, put the empty in here. And I created a constraint, object constraint property, which is shrink wrap. And I shrink wrapped it to the ground so that when I move this empty, when I press, let me go numpad 7, when I press G, I know it's going to try and cling to the ground. Because if it's too far from the ground, if I didn't have this shrink wrap, let's just remove this quickly. One thing you'll notice, I'll move this around, it seems to be working now, but what if I do this? See, it's no longer working. And that's kind of why I use the constraint property to shrink wrap it to the ground. And obviously, the final thing that I do is I take this empty and hold in Shift, click on the leaves and the tree, Control P, and I parent the leaves and tree to the empty, so that when I move the empty, the tree is automatically moving with it. And this way you can create a scene doing this and have all the grass and rock placed on the ground, and then when you want to add specific objects like a house or like a tree or something unique where you don't want rocks and grass to be around in a random location, this is one way to try and combat that. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on geometry nodes. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.